I'm David Lipson in Marysville. Welcome to this special presentation 6 months after Black Saturday. Now that the rubble's been cleared, what's next for the many thousands of people touched by the Victorian bushfires?
I'm Ahron Young in St Andrews. We'll be speaking with Daggar-Nickson and the Victorian Premier John Brumby about the recovery process and what they're doing to help prevent another Black Saturday.
And I'm Daggar-Nickson in Kinglake. We'll take a close look at communities trying to fight back after Australia's worst peacetime disaster.
When I first came into Marysville the day after Black Saturday, the shock was almost overwhelming. What had been a beautiful and quaint mountainside town was gone, replaced by grey and black rubble. Well, that's all been cleared now. Marysville is a blank canvas ready to be rebuilt. But in the meantime, the emptiness here is just so sad. And though many are determined to fight back, there are some who say they'll never be able to return to Marysville. Ian and Moya Austin don't come to Marysville much anymore. Their old driveway leads to a vacant block where their home and everything they owned used to stand.
I drove into Marysville, cut the trees off the road and drove into Marysville. There was nothing left. Nothing left.
This was their town in happier times, a playground for lovers of the Australian bush, nestled in the mountains an hour and a half out of Melbourne. At 68 years old, Ian was eyeing retirement, but they couldn't afford insurance, and now, instead of winding back, Ian is working 7 days, fencing and chopping firewood to make ends meet.
Oh, we're sort of managing, but
well, let's take it day by day.
our lives have changed right around. You know, we've had to make that many decisions. You know, different decisions what we've never had to make before. We just took everything for granted because we're getting old and that's all it was.
This converted bus, donated from Queensland, is now home, parked among a handful of other caravans next to the footy oval at Alexandra, half an hour away. Amid all their uncertainty, one thing is sure: Ian and Moya won't live in Marysville again.
It's not the same, and it never will be.
It's a sentiment not lost on those who have decided to stay. The once iconic lolly shop has been one of the first shops to reopen, now operating out of a shipping container.
The lolly shop is back in a very small way.
Its owner, Julia Harris, believes the town is slowly turning a corner.
It'll never be quite the same. It had a lot of character, a lot of old buildings, but I think we can only look forward and it can be bigger and better, I guess.
Some of the old residents are now living here at the temporary village set up by the government. One of them is Chris Muir.
When we could see the rubble, we could still identify with what was there, even though it was devastating. Now that it's gone, even locals are losing their bearings.
He used to run a cafe on the main strip. Like his neighbours, he's impatient and wants the town rebuilt tomorrow, but he worries somewhat about returning.
As we start to get back into the town, I know we're going to start missing the people that are not there anymore, and that's going to be a difficult one because we know that they've been lost, but we're not in the day-to-day situation where we saw them down the street. So we've been removed from that. I think when we get back into that, we'll notice it even more.
Of the 500 who used to live here, 34 died on Black Saturday. Those who survived, whether they've stayed or moved on, have shown remarkable strength and resilience. But there's a long way to go.
We'll get there one day.
The extent of the bushfires was so widespread, so many Victorian towns were affected, that the reconstruction effort is now massive. On February 7, Daggar-Nickson was Victoria's Police Chief Commissioner. Today she is now in charge of the bushfire recovery effort. I sat down with her here at the iconic St Andrews pub and started by asking whether 6 months on, people are still suffering.
Oh, I think they are. I think people, you can't really underestimate how much impact this has had on people's lives, and not just about losing their homes, but losing so many friends, so much, and they're sort of the way that so many people, went about their daily life, and I think they miss all of that.
Do you think these areas will ever return to how they used to be?
Oh, I think some people have, in some of the communities, significant numbers of people have died, and I think that will certainly change those communities. But I have to say the strength of the communities, the way they've rallied together, the smaller communities, larger communities who've come together, people who've stood up and taken leadership, responsibilities that I'm sure some of them never imagined they would. And I think that's been a really, the other side to watch how communities, these are not elected representatives I'm talking about, these are, citizens who've just said we have to get this done and we're going to be part of it and we're going to be part of the future. So I think they'll be different than they were, but I don't see any of our communities disappearing, for any reason at all.
But what about the psychological effects for people who are returning home, looking out the window and knowing that their neighbours died in the fires? What happens to them?
Yeah, that's not going to be the same for them. And I think for young people who lost, kids they went to school with, and for others who lost neighbours, that will be very different. But you still get the sense that people are trying to work through a lot of these issues. You've heard it probably people call it fire brain. And I was just talking to an older lady today who was saying she forgets things, and then I named it for her and she said, right, is that what I've got?
For the people who don't have to rebuild, whose homes were saved, they now have to pay the extra cost of bringing their homes up to the new fire safety regulations. But for them, they see this as smoke and mirrors, that nothing would have stopped that fire on that day. What do you say to those people?
Let's just take what's called the top zone, which is a fire zone, the FZ, and it's the highest level. The idea is that having looked at your land, on the slope of the land, how close you are to trees, all of those things are all part of what's taken into account to determine what the level is. So once that's done, then in terms of rebuilding, you have to think about, putting in particular kinds of roof of certain quality. You have to either have double glazed windows or you've got to have shutters, and so it goes. If your house survived the fires and you're in what would be the FZ, the top zone, then people are going to have to rethink about their own protection. And it was never a guarantee that you'd survive in your house. It's about a level that says you'd get significant levels of protection. So all those other people who now should realise, I hope, that they are living in areas that are at significant risk now need to think about their own homes. But I think there are about 500,000, not in the top fire zone areas, but certainly across many of our areas, particularly in Victoria, that that are in fire risk areas.
But as you say, that's hundreds of thousands of homes. How do you deal with all those people, all those homes? Sure, it happened in this area this time round. 3 years ago, it happened in another area of the state. Is it actually feasible? Is it possible to fire protect all those homes?
Well, I think what is possible is that to work with the CFA in all of the local communities, to look at what the risk is within your own area, to start reading, to start thinking about it, to start attending, some of the CFA meetings. I mean, one of the things that I was told by a lot of people, that they door knocked CFA and other agencies, door knocked people, sent letters out and, inviting them to meetings to prepare for the coming fire season, and nobody turns up, or hardly anybody turns up. So I think it's about each of us recognising that this disaster struck across the whole of the state. So you're from the north and, Coleraine and Pombanite, and up north to Mudgegonga, and then through even Bendigo, that we all do have to take seriously this issue, start to find out what do we really need to know to protect ourselves, and then you're going to make some decisions, and that decision may be, as many people said, I'm not staying, and as soon as it becomes a day where I think the weather warning is severe, then I am going to go, and they're the choices people will make.
Which is an interesting point. 113 people who died during the bushfires died in their homes, and one gripe I've come across time and time again is people who are angry about no warning, the warning system. What do you think? Well,
I think that's really one of the key pieces for the Royal Commission to work on, and with using expertise we have within Victoria and other places to say, well, what would it take for people to understand? How do you manage to communicate across the whole of the state? And in many areas where there is limited mobile phone coverage. So I know the fire affected communities have said to us, we need better fire cover, better fire radio coverage so we can get this information. I think the new warning systems that the government's putting into place will be part of that. I think people being far more aware of the risks in their own area and thinking about what they can do in their own limit, their own area around their houses. I think all of that is part of it. There were a lot of warnings put out. I think the week beforehand about the danger but maybe people just didn't quite understand it. What we have to do is figure out how to communicate better, and I think that's that will come out of the Royal Commission's recommendations.
Despite the lessons learnt from Black Saturday, there are growing fears this coming fire season could see parts of Victoria again decimated by wildfires, with experts expecting conditions to be just as bad as 6 months ago. For more, I spoke with fire expert Dr. Kevin Tolhurst. Could what we saw 6 months ago in terms of Black Saturday possibly happen again?
It's certainly quite feasible that we will see another event like 7th of February. We've got a number of locations around the state where potentially the same sort of disastrous events could take place. I guess what we hope might change is the degree of impact that has on people's lives in particular. But in terms of the fuel, the topography, the way in which people are built into the rural community, into forested areas, it's more than likely that we're going to have an event such as 7th of February again.
So are we totally at the mercy of conditions?
No, we're not. Look, we live in an environment where fire is a natural part of the landscape, and we're not going to remove fire from that. While we've got the climatic conditions that we've got, the vegetation we've got, the topography we've got, we're not going to change the fire. What we can change is how people are placed in that fire environment, so how ready people are mentally and physically, and how well we as a community can deal with those fire conditions. And that's the thing, I guess, that we need to concentrate on and change.
Well, just on that, is enough being done to avoid these type of catastrophic fires in the future?
There's a need to make sure that we replace the fire that we've removed through active suppression with managed or prescribed burns. And there's a program in place that is starting to increase the amount of fire in the landscape. So people need to be fully aware of what they could potentially face. They need to be able to make a well-informed decision, and then they need to have real alternatives as to what they can do in the face of a fire.
Obviously, a lot of the focus has been on Victoria, but do you think other states are vulnerable to these type of wild catastrophic fires?
I think we can expect to see more severe fires in New South Wales and South East Queensland in particular, more so than we've seen historically.
Dr. Tolhurst, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Coming up on this special Sky News presentation, 6 months on from Black Saturday.
When we said it to the boys, they were like, we're not living anywhere else, we were born there.
And we speak with the Victorian Premier, John Brumby.
The single overriding objective that I've got is to make the state safe.
That's still to come.